The most dangerous men in town were the only ones who stopped for her. Everybody else kept walking. That is the whole story, really. Everything else is just the details of what happens when one little girl refuses to give up and the rest of a town decides to look the other way. Her name was Rosie. She was 6 years old. She weighed 41 pounds. And on the 4th day of January, in a Kentucky town that had already forgotten she existed, she put on a purple jacket with a broken zipper and walked out the door into the coldest morning of the year. Not because someone told her to, because there was no one left to tell her anything. Her mother had not opened her eyes in 4 days. Her baby brother Cody was crying again in the back room. The formula was almost gone. The water from the tap came out cold, and always would now because the pipes in this house had not been properly insulated in 20 years, and the landlord had not been properly anything in longer than that. Rosie knew the formula was supposed to be mixed with warm water. She had read the instructions on the side of the can 3 times. She could not read every word, but she understood the picture. A warm bottle, a dry baby, a mother watching. She did not have any of those things. What she had was 4 days of experience doing this alone, and a piece of paper folded small and pressed into the torn lining of her jacket that she had written and rewritten in the dark until the letters came out right. Let me tell you how Rosie got to that sidewalk. It did not happen in a single morning. It happened across 4 days of trying everything a 6-year-old could think of, knocking on every door she could reach, speaking to every adult who would slow down long enough to hear her. 4 days of doing everything right in a world that was doing everything wrong. The first day she went next door. The house next door belonged to a man named Walt Briggs. Rosie had seen him before. He drove a truck with a dent in the passenger door, and he kept his porch light on at night, which meant something to Rosie, though she could not have explained exactly what. A porch light on at night meant someone was home. Someone was waiting. Someone wanted you to find them. She knocked 4 times, hard the way her mother had taught her to knock when it was important. Not a polite tap, a real knock. The kind that said she was there, and she needed something, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Nobody came. She waited on the top step for 11 minutes. She counted. Then she went back inside and checked on Cody and sat in the kitchen watching her mother's chest rise and fall under the thin blanket and tried to think of the next thing. The second day, she went to the grocery store on the corner of Sycamore and 4th. She had been in that store before with her mother. She knew where the bread was and where the cereal was, and she knew that the woman who worked the register on weekday mornings had red hair and a coffee cup that said "World's Okayest Boss" on the side, and usually smiled at Rosie when they came in together. Rosie walked to the register and waited for a man buying cigarettes to finish, and then she stepped up and told the woman with red hair that her mother was sick and could not get out of bed, and that she and her baby brother needed help. The woman listened. She nodded. She said she would call someone. Rosie thanked her and went home. Nobody came. On the 3rd day, she walked to Harlan Elementary School, where she was supposed to start 1st grade in 2 weeks. She had been to that school twice before. Once for registration and once for an orientation where they gave all the kids a pencil and showed them where the bathrooms were. Rosie had liked the bathrooms. They were warm and they had paper towels in a dispenser that made a satisfying sound when you pulled one out. The school was closed for winter break. The doors were locked. The parking lot was empty. The windows were dark in the way that buildings go dark when they have been left alone for a while. Not just lights off, but all the life drained out of them. Rosie stood in front of those doors for a long time. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass and looked through it at the hallway inside, at the bulletin boards, at the small chairs stacked on top of small tables, at the row of hooks along the wall where the kids were supposed to hang their backpacks. She did not have a backpack yet. She turned around and walked home. That night, the 3rd night, was the worst one. Not because anything happened, because of the silence. Cody had cried himself to sleep, and Rosie sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet under the sink and listened to the house breathe around her. The refrigerator had been unplugged for 2 weeks. Her mother had done that on purpose back when she could still stand up. She said it saved electricity. Rosie had not understood at the time. She understood now. You unplug the things you do not need so you can pay for the things you cannot live without. Her mother had been making calculations like that for months. Rosie had just not known the name for what she was watching. She got up and looked in the cabinet where the formula was kept. One can left, maybe 3 days worth if she was careful. Cody was 8 months old. He could not eat crackers. He could not eat the last of the peanut butter spread thin on bread. He needed what he needed, and there was only so much of it left. Rosie took out a piece of paper from the pad her mother kept in the kitchen drawer. She found a pencil. She sat down at the kitchen table in the dark because the electricity had been cut off 6 days ago, and she had already used the one flashlight they owned to read Cody a story before he fell asleep, and she did not want to waste the battery. She knew what she wanted to write. She had known for days. She just needed the words to come out right. She wrote slowly. The letters were large and uneven. She said the words out loud in a whisper as she formed each one the way her kindergarten teacher had taught her. Please help us. She stopped. Started again. Please help us. Mama won't wake up. She looked at it, read it again, wrote it again on the same paper lower down because the first version looked wrong, too shaky, like the hand of someone who did not believe what they were asking. She wrote it a third time, then a fourth. By the fifth time, the letters were steady, not perfect, but steady in the way that mattered, the way that said she meant every one of them and was not going to stop meaning them no matter who read it. She folded the paper into a small square. She had a purple jacket that she wore everywhere one her mother had found at a church sale in October. The jacket was 2 sizes too big and had a broken zipper that her mother had meant to fix. The inside seam along the bottom had come loose on one side. Rosie pressed the folded paper into that gap in the lining and pushed it up with 2 fingers until it sat flat against the fabric. You would not know it was there unless you felt for it. She tried the phone one more time. Her mother's phone. She had been rationing the battery because there was no way to charge it. She pressed 911. 3 rings. The screen went black. She plugged it into the wall out of habit before she remembered the electricity was off. She sat for a while longer, then she got up and checked on Cody and then went and sat beside her mother on the mattress on the floor and put her small hand on her mother's arm and listened to her breathe. In the morning, she got up and mixed the last of the formula with cold water and fed Cody and changed him and put him back in his crib with every soft thing she could find layered around him. A shirt of her own, 2 dish towels, a pillowcase, the small fleece blanket she had picked up from the floor near the front door where it had fallen. She was systematic about it. She had thought about this during the night. She had thought about where the cold came into the room and which parts of Cody needed to stay warmest, and she had arranged everything accordingly. She was 6 years old and she had never taken a class in anything, and she was keeping her baby brother alive through the application of pure logic and love. Then she put on her purple jacket and walked out the front door. Main Street in Harlan, Kentucky in January is a particular kind of cold. It is not just the temperature, though the temperature was brutal that morning, sitting just below zero with a wind that had been dragging itself down off Pine Mountain since before sunrise. It is the light. The winter light in that part of Kentucky has a gray quality to it, a flatness, like the color has been worn down by too many hard seasons. The storefronts sit close to the sidewalk. The awnings hold their frost. The whole street gives the impression of hunkering down, holding still, waiting for something warmer to come along. Rosie had walked this street before with her mother. She knew the diner on the corner Dot's place, and the hardware store, and the pharmacy and the laundromat where they came on Saturday mornings sometimes, and her mother would let her put the quarters in the machine. She knew the faces of the buildings, the way you know the faces of adults who are around, but not really yours, familiar but not close. She was looking for someone to stop. That was the only plan she had left. Walk until someone stopped. Show them the paper if they did. Say what needed to be said. She did not know how long it would. She did not know if it would work. She knew it was the last thing she had. She walked 3 blocks before her legs started to go wrong. It was not weakness exactly. It was the cold mixing with the hunger, mixing with 4 days of not sleeping properly, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being responsible for something you are too small to be responsible for. Her knees stopped cooperating first. Not all at once. They just became uncertain the way knees do when the body is running out of what it needs to run. She went down on the corner of Main and Dyer. Both knees hit the pavement at the same time. Then both palms. The cold of the concrete cut straight through her jeans. She stayed there for a moment, hands flat on the ground, head down, breathing. Then she lifted her head and said 2 words. Not to anyone in particular, not to the man coming out of the hardware store 30 feet away, or the woman in the gray coat who had just rounded the corner and was walking toward her. Not to the couple on the far side of the street who had slowed down just slightly before speeding up again. Just into the air in front of her, into the cold and the gray January light. I'm starving. 2 words, flat and quiet, not a performance, not a cry for help in any theatrical sense. Just a statement of fact delivered by a child who had run out of the energy required to make it sound like anything other than what it was. The man from the hardware store glanced at her, then looked up at the sky the way people do when they are deciding not to decide something, then walked to his truck. The woman in the gray coat was named Marlene Gibbs. She taught kindergarten at Harlan Elementary. She had been teaching there for 19 years. She had met Rosie twice, once at registration in October and once at orientation in November, and she knew the child's name, and she knew the address on the enrollment form, and she had noticed at orientation that Rosie's shoes were slightly too small and that her mother looked tired in the particular way that people look tired when it is not just one bad week, but a long stretch of bad weeks stacked on top of each other. Marlene Gibbs saw Rosie on the pavement, and she recognized her. She stopped. She stood there for 3 full seconds, which is a long time to stand still on a cold sidewalk. Long enough to see everything. The jacket with the broken zipper, the bare hands, the thin tennis shoes with no socks, the knees on the concrete, the way the child's head was down and her shoulders were curled inward, and her whole small body was focused on the simple task of not collapsing the rest of the way. Marlene Gibbs had 19 years of experience recognizing children who needed help. She took 1 step forward, and then she kept walking. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, and she walked past Rosie and around the corner, and she did not look back. She would think about those 3 seconds for the rest of her life. On the other side of Main Street, in front of a bar called Caldwell's that had not yet opened for the day, 5 motorcycles sat idling at the curb. Big machines, all of them the kind that shake the fillings in your teeth when they revers. The men sitting on them matched the machines in scale and in presence. Leather cuts, tattoos from collar to wrist, boots that had seen serious miles. These were not weekend riders. These were not men who put on costumes on Saturdays. These were full-patch members of a chapter that had been running through eastern Kentucky for going on 30 years, men who had earned every piece of what they wore and who carried the weight of it without drama. Cole Decker was the biggest of them. 6 feet 4 inches, 260 pounds of face that had been rearranged by life a sufficient number of times to have achieved something beyond conventional handsomeness, something harder and more permanent. He had a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone, a souvenir from a situation 11 years ago that he did not discuss. He had been the chapter's sergeant-at-arms for 7 of his 11 years in the club, which meant he was the man who handled problems, physical problems, the kind that required someone large and calm and unhesitating. He was sitting on his Harley watching Main Street the way he watched everything, with a quality of attention that most people do not manage, the kind that comes from spending years in situations where missing something small can cost you something large. He was waiting for a man named Rook to finish settling a tab inside Caldwell's. He was not in a hurry. The cold did not bother him much. He had been cold before in worse circumstances and in worse places. He saw Rosie go down. He watched, not because he was deciding whether to care. Cole Decker was not a man who deliberated much about caring. He watched because watching was how he processed things, how he assessed, how he moved from observation to certainty before he moved at all. He watched the hardware store man choose his truck. He watched Marlene Gibbs stop and then not stop. He watched the couple cross to the other side of the street. And he watched Rosie stay on the pavement, knees and palms on the concrete, head slowly coming up again, and say something he could not hear from across the street, but whose shape he recognized. A few words, short, directed nowhere. The words of someone who has stopped expecting anyone to listen and has started simply saying them into the air because saying them is all there is left to do. Cole kicked the stand down on his bike. Rook was just coming out the door of Caldwell's when Cole swung his leg off the seat. The big man stood for a moment beside his machine, steam rising off his shoulders in the cold. "Where are you going?" Cole did not answer. He stepped off the curb. A truck had to brake hard to avoid him. The driver laid on the horn. Cole did not break stride. He walked across Main Street like the truck did not exist. Like the cold did not exist, like the 30 feet of pavement between him and that child was simply something to be covered. And so he was covering it. He stopped about 5 feet from Rosie. He did not crouch down, did not soften himself, did not try to arrange his face into something less than what it was. He just stood there, this enormous figure in black leather, with the cold air around him and the street behind him, and he looked down at a 41-pound girl with the cracked lips and no socks, and both palms still flat on the pavement. "When is the last time you ate?" His voice was low, rough in the way of a voice that has spent decades in loud places. Not unkind, just direct. The voice of a man who does not waste words and assumes you will not waste them either. Rosie looked up at him. She had seen frightening things in 6 years. She had seen her mother cry in a way that meant something was very wrong, and she had seen the lights go off one by one in the house as the months got harder, and she had seen the way people looked at them, sometimes in the grocery store. That particular look that is not quite pity and not quite judgment, but something unpleasant in between. She had seen things that would have made other children look away. She did not look away from Cole Decker. She held up 2 fingers. 2 hours, he said. She shook her head. 2 days. She nodded. Cole turned and looked at Dot's place on the corner. Dark. Closed sign in the window. He walked to the door and knocked. Not a polite knock, a real one. The kind that rattles the glass in the frame. Nothing. He knocked again. A light came on in the back. A face appeared. Dorothy Hargrove, who had owned and operated that diner for 31 years and who had seen most of what Harlan had to offer in that time, and who was not by any reasonable measure a woman who was easily moved by anything. She was 63 years old, short and solid, with gray hair, cut practical, and a way of looking at things that suggested she had already thought of whatever you were about to say and had formed an opinion about it. She looked at Cole standing at her door, and her face tightened. She shook her head, pointed at the closed sign. Cole did not move. He turned and pointed over his shoulder at Rosie, still on the pavement. That tiny figure with her knees on the cold concrete and her purple jacket and her breath making small clouds in the air. Then he turned back to the glass and said 4 words. "She has not eaten." Dot looked at the child, looked at Cole. Then she reached down and unlocked the door. Cole went back and picked Rosie up. Not gently, not roughly. The way you pick up something that needs to be somewhere warm right now, and the time for gentleness is after. He carried her across the sidewalk and through the door and set her down in the booth by the window, where the vinyl seat was cold, but the air inside was not. Dot was already behind the counter, moving fast the way someone moves when they are angry at themselves for needing to be convinced and are making up for it. Grill on, pans out, no questions. Within 5 minutes, Rook had come through the door and 3 others behind him. They sat in the booth directly behind Rosie without being asked. Backs to the wall, facing the door. Old habit, like they were standing guard over something that mattered, which was exactly what they were doing. A man named Boone, who had a full sleeve of tattoos on both arms and a voice that did not match his face at all. Soft and a little careful in the way of a man who has spent time learning to speak gently, took off his leather jacket and draped it over Rosie's shoulders. The jacket was large enough to function as a blanket. It weighed more than it looked like it should, and it smelled like engine oil and winter air, and something else underneath, something warm and human and worn. Rosie grabbed the edges with both hands and pulled it tight around herself. Dot put a plate down in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast with butter, 4 strips of bacon, a tall glass of milk. Rosie did not reach for the fork. She reached for the bacon with both hands and bit into it and started coughing because she tried to eat too fast and her body had forgotten temporarily how to handle food. Cole put a hand on her arm. Heavy and still. Slow. It is not going anywhere. She slowed down. Barely, but enough. The diner was quiet around the sound of a child eating her first real meal in 4 days. Nobody spoke. Nobody stared. The bikers drank their coffee and watched the door and let Rosie eat in the particular kind of privacy that can only be created by a group of large men who have collectively decided that this space belongs to someone else right now. Dot brought more. Chicken soup with crackers, another glass of milk, a warm roll. Rosie ate all of it, scraped the soup bowl with the edge of the spoon until there was nothing left, pulled the roll apart and pressed every crumb into her mouth. Then she leaned back into the corner of the booth. Boone's jacket pulled up to her chin, and her eyes started to close. She was asleep in under a minute. The diner went quiet in a different way then. The grill ticked as it cooled. The wind moved against the windows. Cole looked at the sleeping child, and then at the jacket Rosie had come in wearing, the thin purple thing, with the broken zipper that had been left on the seat beside her. Rook reached over and picked it up. He was examining the seam along the bottom, the place where the lining had come loose, when something shifted under his fingers. He pressed, felt the edge of paper. He looked at Cole. He pulled the lining back carefully and reached in with 2 fingers and brought out a folded square of notebook paper. Then more paper behind it. He spread them on the table one by one. A utility shutoff notice 3 weeks old. A past due rent slip stamped in red. A gas station receipt for 1 bottle of water and a pack of crackers. A letter from a county assistance office explaining that the application for emergency benefits had been denied pending additional documentation. Please call the number below during business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And under all of it, folded smaller than the rest, a piece of paper with a child's handwriting. Large, uneven letters pressed hard into the page. Some of them written over and over in the same place, like someone practicing. Like someone making sure the word came out right no matter what. Please help us. Mama won't wake up. Cole unfolded it slowly. Read it again. He set it down on the table with the same care he might use setting down something that could break. Nobody spoke. Outside, a car passed on Main Street, and the sound of it faded, and the diner went quiet again. The heat hummed. Boone stared at his coffee. Rook looked at the paper. The other 2 men at the table kept their eyes forward, jaws set, doing the work of holding something still inside themselves that wanted to move. Cole looked at the paper for a long time. 20 years ago, in a different state, in a different January, there had been a piece of paper with his name on it too. A form from a county social services office. Official. Typed. Informing him that his younger brother Jamie, age 9, had been found unresponsive at the family address and pronounced deceased at the scene. Cole had been 6 months into a sentence, at the time a stupid sentence for a stupid fight, the kind of thing that happens when a young man has more anger than sense. He had not known Jamie was in trouble. He had not known things had gotten bad enough for Jamie to be alone in that house with no food and no heat and nobody checking on him. He had not known because nobody had told him. And because nobody had told him, he had not been there. And because he had not been there, Jamie had died in a cold house at 9 years old, while his older brother sat in a county facility 90 miles away, not knowing. Cole had carried a folded copy of that form in his wallet for 20 years. Not as punishment, as memory, as the thing that reminded him what it cost to look away. He looked at Rosie sleeping in the booth. He looked at the paper on the table. Then Rosie made a sound. Not a cry, not a word. Just a small, involuntary sound, the kind a child makes when the warmth finally reaches them all the way through and the body begins to believe, maybe for the first time in days, that it is safe. Cole waited. Rosie's eyes opened a few minutes later. She looked around the diner without alarm, taking in where she was with the calm assessment of a child who has learned to wake up quickly and figure things out fast. She looked at Boone's jacket around her shoulders, at the empty soup bowl, at the men in the booth behind her. Then she looked at Cole. He pushed the paper gently toward her. Not accusatory, not dramatic, just acknowledging. She looked at it for a moment. Then she began to speak. She told him about Walt Briggs and the porch light and the door that did not open. She told him about the woman with the red hair at the grocery store who had nodded and not called anyone. She told him about the school with its locked doors and its dark windows and the bulletin boards she had seen through the glass. She told him about the phone dying before anyone answered. She told him about writing the note, about practicing the letters in the dark until they came out right. She did not cry. She spoke the way a child speaks when they have told a story so many times in their own head that the emotion has been worn smooth by repetition. Not numb, just steady. The way a person is steady when they have made peace with the fact that what happened happened and the only question left is what happens next. Cole listened to all of it. When she was done, the diner was so quiet you could hear the coal pressing against the windows. Rosie looked down at the table. Then she looked up and said something she had not been asked, something that arrived the way important things sometimes arrive, not as a response, but as a correction, a thing that needed to be said because she had just realized it had not been said yet. Cody is still in the house. Cole was on his feet before she finished the sentence. He looked at Rook. Stay with her. Nobody moves her. He looked at Dot behind the counter. Sycamore Street. How far? 7 blocks south. Left on Vine. Small white house. Front porch with a broken step. Cole was through the door before she finished. Rook and 3 others came to their feet, but Cole was already outside. 4 engines fired up on Main Street in rapid succession, the sound of them rolling up the block like a wave and bouncing off the storefronts and rising into the gray January sky above Harlan, Kentucky. Boone stayed. He sat back down in the booth across from Rosie and looked at her in a way that was not pitying and not dramatic, just present. Rosie looked out the window at the empty street where the motorcycles had been. She held the edges of Boone's jacket in both hands. She did not ask if everything was going to be okay. She was 6 years old, and she had been managing the world without that kind of reassurance for 4 days, and she had learned not to need it. But she did not let go of the jacket. She held on. 7 blocks is not far on a motorcycle, even in ice, even in the kind of cold that turns the road surface unpredictable and makes every curve a calculation. 4 Harleys covered those 7 blocks in under 2 minutes, running south on Main and cutting left on Vine without slowing much engines loud enough to rattle the windows of the houses they passed. Cole did not need the address to know which house it was. He knew before he turned onto Sycamore Street. He knew from the way the block looked the particular quality of a street that has been struggling for long enough that the struggle has become the landscape. Chain-link fences with gaps in them. Gutters pulling away from the roofline. A mattress on a front porch 3 houses down, dark with old rain. Porch lights that had been burned out for months because the people inside had other things to spend money on besides bulbs. He pulled up in front of the small white house and killed the engine. The front door was open, not cracked, not ajar, wide open. Standing open the way a door stands open when no one has touched it in a while. Swung back on its hinges and held there by nothing except its own weight and the fact that no one had come along to close it. Cold air pouring in and out of that opening like breath. Cole was off the bike before the engine finished ticking down. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment, looked at the door, the broken step, the porch railing held together with wire someone had twisted around the joint years ago and never replaced. He could see his own breath. He could see breath coming from the interior of the house too, the cold air inside meeting the slightly less cold air outside and making small clouds in the doorway. He went up the steps. The house was dark, the kind of dark that tells you the power has been off long enough for the eyes to stop expecting light. Not the dark of a room with the curtains drawn, but the dark of a place that has forgotten it was ever lit. The only illumination came from the gray light pushing through the open door behind him and from a street lamp halfway down the block whose light reached the hallway in a thin diagonal strip. Cole stood in the hallway and let his eyes adjust. Living room to the left. He could see the outline of a couch with the cushions caved in, a folding table with something propped under one leg. No television, no pictures on the walls, nothing on the surfaces that said a family lived here, except a single coloring book on the floor near the table with most of its pages torn out. Not torn in anger, not scattered, carefully removed. The remaining pages were still in the binding, still neat. Rosie had probably used those pages for something. He did not know what yet. He moved to the kitchen. The counters were bare, not clean bare, not tidy bare, but empty in the way of a space where there has simply been nothing to put on them for a long time. No cereal box, no bread, not a can of soup, not a jar of peanut butter, not the half-empty bottle of ketchup that lives in every American kitchen as a kind of default proof of habitation. The refrigerator was against the wall. Cole opened it, empty, completely bare. Not even a smell because there was nothing left in it to smell. He swung the door wider, saw that the plug had been pulled from the wall and the cord coiled neatly on top of the unit. He stood and looked at that coiled cord for a moment. That was not neglect. That was calculation. That was a woman who had looked at her monthly call and made a decision. The refrigerator was a drain. If you had nothing to put in it, it was a drain with no return. So you unplugged it, and you wound the cord, and you moved on to the next calculation. He had seen that kind of thinking before. in people who were not giving up, but who had been given so little to work with that every single choice had to be load-bearing. The thought settled in him and did not leave. He moved back into the hallway. There was a door at the end, and from behind it came a sound, thin and low, barely there, the sound of someone trying to speak through a wall of exhaustion. Not quite a word, not quite a moan, something in between. The sound of a person who still has enough left to make a sound, but not much more than that. Cole pushed the door open. Willa Pruitt was on a mattress on the floor. No frame, no box spring. The mattress was against the wall in the corner of the room, and she was on it with a single thin blanket pulled to her chin and one arm out to the side, palm up, like she had been reaching for something in her sleep, and her arm had just stayed where it was. She was thin. Not the thin of someone who is naturally slight, but the thin of someone who has been spending more calories than they have been taking in for months, the slow accounting of a body that is running on reserves. Her face was angular in a way that suggested it had been softer once. Her hair was across her face, and she had not moved it because moving required resources she did not have. Her eyes were open. That was the first thing Cole registered. She was not unconscious. She was awake, or close enough to awake that the distinction did not matter much practically. Her eyes were open, and they found him when he came through the door, and they registered what they saw, this large, dark shape in the doorway, and she reacted the way anyone would. She tried to move away. She pushed with her arm, the one that had been out to the side, and tried to shift herself back against the wall. Her arm did not have much in it. She managed a few inches. Cole stopped where he was. He did not move toward her. He stayed in the doorway and kept his voice low and level, the voice he used when he needed to be heard without being frightening, which was a skill he had developed over years of being the kind of man who walks into tense situations and needs them to go a particular way. Your daughter is safe. Her name is Rosie. She is at the diner on Main Street. She ate. She is warm. She is with people who are watching out for her. Willa stopped pushing. She looked at him. Her breathing was audible. Shallow and quick, the breathing of someone running a fever or very close to it. Her lips were dry and cracked in the same way Rosie's had been, which told Cole that the dehydration had been going on in this house for at least several days. He kept talking. Quiet, steady. There is a prescription bottle next to you on the floor. Is that yours? What was it for? She turned her head slowly, looked at the bottle, looked back at him. Kidney, she said. Her voice was barely there. The word came out in two pieces, key and knee, with a pause between them. Infection. How long since you had the medication? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Cole did not change his expression. How long have you been on this floor? She thought about it with the careful deliberation of someone for whom thinking was currently expensive. 4 days, maybe 5 in the morning. He reached for his phone, and then he heard Rook behind him in the hallway, phone already at his ear, having made the same calculation a half-second earlier. Rook was already talking to the 911 dispatcher, giving the address, giving the description, calm and factual in the way of a man who has made these calls before. Cole turned back to Willa. She was looking at him with the particular attention of someone who needs to say something and is assembling the energy for it. Is Rosie okay? Not her own condition, not the pain she was in, not the 4 days on the floor and the fever and the infection that had been spreading through her for weeks, while she tried to hold everything together from a mattress on the ground. Is Rosie okay? Cole crouched down, not all the way to the floor, just enough to change the angle between them to stop looming. Rosie is okay. Rosie is more than okay. That girl of yours has been fighting like hell for 4 days. She found us. She did not stop until she found someone. Willa closed her eyes. Something in her face changed. A tension that had been in her jaw and around her eyes for what looked like a very long time went out of her slowly, the way tension leaves when the thing you have been holding on for finally arrives. And then she said the second thing. Her voice was quieter than the first. Barely a breath. Cody is in the back room. I told Rosie to keep him in the back room. He should still be there. Cole stood up. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. The back room was at the end of the hallway on the opposite side, a small square room that in a different life might have been a home office or a nursery set up with intention, with a crib bought new and a mobile hung over it, and paint chosen carefully from a fan of color samples. In this life, it was a room with a crib against the far wall, and no other furniture and no heat, and a window that let in a thin line of cold air along its bottom edge where the seal had failed. Cole pushed the door open and stood in the entrance and looked at the crib. There was a baby in it, and the baby was wrapped. That was the first thing he saw, and it stopped him for a moment long enough to take it in fully and understand what he was looking at. The baby was wrapped in layers, a small shirt, child-sized, recognizably rosies from its purple color, and the tiny flower printed on the collar. Over that, 2 dish towels folded lengthwise and draped. Over that, a pillowcase tucked in on both sides. Over that, a small fleece blanket blue that had been folded to double its insulating thickness and laid over the top of everything else. It had not been done in a panic. It had been done with thought. The dish towels were placed to cover the gaps where the shirt did not reach. The pillowcase was tucked rather than just laid on top. The blanket was doubled. Someone had looked at this baby in this cold room and thought about where the warmth needed to go and had arranged things accordingly. A 6-year-old had done this, in the dark, on her own, before walking 7 blocks in 5 below weather to find help because she had done everything else she could think of. Cole walked to the crib. Cody was on his back with his face turned slightly to the side. His lips had a faint bluish tint that Cole did not like. His breathing was slow, but it was there steady and rhythmic in and out. Cole put the back of his hand near the baby's face and felt the warmth coming off him. Not enough warmth, but enough to mean the baby was still generating heat, still fighting in the wordless, biological way that all living things fight, just to continue. Cole picked him up. He brought the baby against his own chest under his leather, cut skin and jacket, and the bulk of his own body heat wrapped around this small cold thing. He held the back of Cody's head with one hand and braced the other against the wall of the crib. He stood there. He counted. He had done this before in his mind many times over the years. Not literally, not with a baby in his arms, but the shape of it. Standing in a cold room with something small and alive that needed warmth, and not having enough warmth to give it, and counting anyway because counting was the only thing available to do. He had stood in that room in his imagination 100 times sometimes, in the version where he had gotten there faster, where things had gone differently, where the form from the county social services office had never needed to exist. He stood in the actual room. He counted the actual minutes. 11. He counted 11 minutes before he heard the ambulance turn onto Sycamore Street. He heard it from 3 blocks away. The sound coming through the walls of the house, the way sound does in winter, cleaner and sharper than in warmer months, the cold air conducting it without softening it. He heard it and he did not move yet. He waited until he heard it stop outside. He waited until he heard boots on the porch. He waited until Rook said his name from the hallway. Then he walked out. The paramedics were young, both of them, which registered briefly and without judgment. They were good. They moved fast, and they communicated with each other without wasted words, and they had the equipment ready before they were fully through the door. Cole handed Cody to the one who reached for him first, and he stepped back and let them work. They took Willa out on a stretcher. She was conscious enough to ask about Rosie one more time as they moved her through the hallway, one hand coming up to grip the paramedic's sleeve, and he told her the same thing Cole had told her, and she let go. They took Cody in the same ambulance. Cole stood on the porch and watched the lights turn the corner and disappear. Rook came and stood beside him. The 2 men were quiet for a moment. Then Cole pulled out his phone and made a call. It lasted less than a minute. He said the address, and he said, "Bring everything," and he said, "Every active member," and he hung up. He made 3 more calls in the same amount of time. Same message each time, same voice, flat and certain, and carrying the particular authority of a man who does not need to explain himself, because the people he is calling already understand the kind of thing that makes him call at this hour. He stood on the porch and waited. They came in groups. First 2 bikes, then 3 more, then a truck pulling a flatbed and 5 more bikes behind it. By the time the count reached 14 motorcycles parked along Sycamore Street, the street had changed. It had been a dark and quiet block of January houses with their lights out and their curtains drawn and their doors shut against the cold and against whatever else the night might bring. Now it had light coming from somewhere and the low rumble of engines idling and the sound of men getting to work. The man they called Hex had been an electrician for 22 years before he joined the club, and in the 7 years since he had not stopped being an electrician. He looked at the fuse box in Willa's kitchen for 90 seconds, made 2 calls to locate the right breaker, and had the power restored in just under 45 minutes. The lights came on one by one through the house, starting with the kitchen and moving back. When the light in the back room came on, Cole was still standing in the hallway, and the room looked worse lit up than it had in the dark. Bare walls and bare floor and a crib with nothing in it now except the layers Rosie had arranged, the shirt and the dish towels and the pillowcase and the doubled blue fleece blanket still in place, still folded exactly as she had folded them. Cole did not go into the room. He went to the kitchen instead, where 3 men were unloading grocery bags onto the counter. Not one bag, not a modest contribution. Cases of water and canned goods and boxes of cereal and a bag of dog food that someone had grabbed by mistake and that somebody else put back outside without comment. Fresh bread, 2 gallons of milk, formula, diapers in 2 sizes because nobody was certain which size Cody used. Baby food, things you would not think to buy if you had not spent time around an infant. Small jars of pureed vegetables, soft crackers, the kind of items that require familiarity with the specific needs of a specific stage of a small human life. These men had children. Many of them had grandchildren. They knew what an 8-month-old needed. A man named Pete Odom, who had been a plumber for 30 years, went through the house methodically and thawed the pipes that had frozen and checked the seals on the windows and identified 2 places where the exterior wall was leaking cold air and covered them temporarily with the kind of heavy tape that holds things together until a real repair can happen. He fixed the front door so it latched properly for the first time in what the condition of the hardware suggested had been years. He did all of this without being asked and without making a production of it. The space heaters came in next. 3 of them plugged in and distributed through the house, the bedroom and the living room and the kitchen. The temperature inside the house began to rise, not quickly, but steadily, the way warmth returns when it has somewhere to return to. The men worked without talking much. That was the thing Cole would remember later, how quiet it was, how there was no performance in any of it, no back patting, no commentary, no one announcing what they were doing or why they were doing it. They just moved through the house and did the things that needed doing, and the house became habitable again slowly, piece by piece, the way any damage is repaired, if you have enough people who know what they are doing and enough will to do it. It was during this time, while the house was being put back together, that the woman from next door came out. She opened her door and stood on her porch and watched the activity on the street, the bikes and the trucks and the men moving back and forth with bags and tools. She was somewhere in her 50s, wrapped in a bathrobe over a coat, which meant she had gotten up quickly and grabbed whatever was closest. She watched for a while. Then she came down off her porch and walked to the edge of the sidewalk. She was looking at Cole. "My kids have not eaten today either," she said. She said it the way you say something you have been holding for a long time. Not with drama, with exhaustion, with the particular kind of plain speech that comes when you are past being embarrassed about the truth and just need someone to hear it. Cole looked at her. "How many kids?" "3. He looked at Rook. Rook was already moving. 2 men walked next door with grocery bags. Full bags. Not a sampling, not a gesture. A month's worth of staples, the kind of haul that means you are not going to lie awake tonight doing arithmetic about what is in the cabinet. The woman stood on her porch and watched them carry the bags inside, and then she sat down on the top step and put her face in her hands and stayed that way for a while. Then the man across the street came out. Then a woman from 2 doors down with a baby on her hip. Then an older man from the end of the block who had a cane and who walked slowly but who stood straight and who looked at Cole the way some older men look at things that surprise them, with a measuring quality that is not quite suspicion and not quite gratitude, but something that takes a moment to become one or the other. Sycamore Street began to open. It happened the way a frozen river thaws, not all at once, but in a sequence, one thing giving way, which makes the next thing possible. The first admission broke something. The seal of isolation that had been holding everyone on this block in their separate difficulties cracked when that woman in the bathrobe said 3 words, "My kids too." And once it cracked, the rest came through. 7 houses in the end. Cole would count them later. 7 families on one block, all of them running on nothing, all of them managing alone and not saying so, and not asking because asking felt like failure or felt like danger or felt like something that would cost them more than staying quiet. 7 households of people who had been invisible to the town at the end of the street and invisible to each other behind their closed doors. The men from the chapter handled all of it. 2 of them drove 35 minutes to the nearest Walmart that was open at that hour and came back with a truck bed full of coats, children's shoes, canned goods, cleaning supplies. They paid for it themselves, splitting the amount between them without discussion. Cole found out the total later, and he did not say anything about it, which was the right response. Somebody started a fire in a metal barrel on the sidewalk around 9 in the evening. Not for warmth exactly, though the warmth was welcome. More because it gave people a place to stand together. And standing together mattered right then. The neighbors who had not spoken to each other in months stood beside men they would have crossed the street to avoid last week, and nobody talked about what any of it meant. They just stood near the fire and let the night do what the night does when you stop fighting it alone. The old man from the end of the block found Cole near the barrel sometime after 10. He reached out and gripped Cole's arm. Not hard, just firmly enough to mean something. "Son," he said, "who sent you?" Cole looked at him. "Nobody sent us." The old man held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has been around long enough to understand that this is actually the best possible answer. That it is, in fact, the only answer that would have satisfied him. He let go of Cole's arm and went back to the fire. Cole stood there. He was thinking about Rosie in the diner, about the paper in the jacket lining and the letters written over and over in the dark until they came out right. About a 6-year-old who had tried 4 times and failed 4 times, and on the 5th try had found someone who did not keep walking. He was thinking about what it costs to keep trying after the 4th time. What it requires of a person, even a small person, even a person who has not yet learned to protect themselves from hoping to stand up after 4 failures and say the same thing one more time. He was thinking about his brother Jamie, not in the way he usually thought about him, with the particular weight of that, the form from the county offices, the 20 years of carrying it. He was thinking about Jamie the way you think about someone when something has shifted and the memory lands differently than it usually does. Softer, more like a presence than an absence. He was thinking that tonight was not the same night as that night, that this time someone had been here. He took out his phone and called Boone. "How is she?" "Sleeping again," Boone said. "Ate a little more when she woke up. Asked about her mother and her brother. I told her they were at the hospital getting taken care of. She said okay, like that was a plan she had already made peace with." Cole looked at the fire. "She okay otherwise?" "Yeah," Boone said. "She is okay. She is more okay than she has any right to be. She is sitting here in this booth with my jacket around her like it is a fort, and she is watching the door, and she is okay." Cole did not say anything for a moment. "Tell Dot to leave the lights on," he said, "in case she wakes up in the night and needs to see where she is." And then from the end of Sycamore Street, where it met Vine in the streetlight, threw its thin light down the block, and the fire in the barrel was the brightest thing in that corner of Harlan, Kentucky, Cole Decker saw a figure standing at the edge of the light. A woman, standing still, watching. She was wearing a long coat, and she had her hands clasped in front of her, and she was looking at the house where the lights were on, and the men were working, and the neighbors were gathered. She had been standing there for a while, long enough to have seen all of it. Cole recognized her. He had seen her on Main Street that afternoon. She had been walking toward Rosie, and she had stopped, and then she had kept going, and he had registered her the way he registered most things without particular judgment as a fact of the landscape. He looked at her now. She was looking at the house. Then she looked at her own hands clasped in front of her, then at the house again. Then she turned and walked away down Vine Street, and her coat disappeared into the dark, and she was gone. Cole watched the place where she had been. He did not know her name yet. He would. Dot Hargrove had opened her diner at 5 in the morning every weekday for 31 years. She had opened it through 2 recessions and 1 flood that put 4 inches of water on Main Street, and 1 winter so bad that the pipes froze 3 times in 6 weeks, and she had to run space heaters under the counter to keep the coffee brewing. She had opened it the morning after her husband left, and the morning after her mother died, and the morning after the town council rejected her application for a facade improvement grant for the 3rd consecutive year. She had opened it because opening it was the thing she did, and because the people of Harlan needed somewhere to go in the morning, and because she was not the kind of woman who closed things. On the 5th day of January, she was at the door at 4:45. She had not slept much. She had gone home around midnight after the last of the bikers had come back through the diner for coffee, after Cole had called to say the house on Sycamore was habitable, and the families were settled and the hospital had confirmed that Willa and Cody were stable. She had gone home and sat at her kitchen table for a while, and then gone to bed and lain there looking at the ceiling until sometime around 3 when she gave up and got up and started coffee. She was at the diner by 4:45. She found a piece of cardboard in the back room and a black marker in the drawer under the register, and she wrote 7 words. She wrote them plain, no flourish, the way she wrote everything. Free breakfast, Sycamore families welcome. Come in. She taped it to the inside of the front window where the light would hit it. Then she turned on the grill. She did not call anyone. She did not post anything anywhere. She did not ask for help or announce what she was doing or explain the reasoning behind it. She just opened the door at 5 and turned the sign to open and started cooking. Rosie was still in the booth by the window. Boone had kept his word. He was asleep sitting upright in the booth behind her arms, folded chin on his chest, a man who could sleep anywhere and had learned to do it years ago. His jacket was still around Rosie. She was awake when Dot came through from the back, sitting with her legs folded under her, looking out the window at the street. Dot stopped when she saw the child's eyes open. They looked at each other. Rosie spoke first. Is the hospital far? Dot set down the rack of coffee mugs she had been carrying. About 10 minutes, she said. They have good people there. Your mama and your brother are in good hands. Rosie nodded. She looked back out the window. Are you hungry? Dot asked. Rosie thought about it for a moment, which was not the response of a child who was no longer hungry, but the response of a child who had spent enough time being hungry that the question required genuine consideration. She had to check. She had to make sure that the feeling of not being empty was still there and that it was real. Yes, she said. Dot cooked eggs and toast and brought them with a glass of orange juice and set them down in front of Rosie without comment. She noticed that Rosie waited a moment before she started eating, not long, just a breath, as if she was making sure the food would still be there when she reached for it. Then she ate steadily and without rushing, which was different from the night before, and Dot thought that was probably a good sign. The first person through the door at 5:15 was a woman named Luann Ostroff from the third house on Sycamore, the one with the curtains in the front window that Dot had always noticed because they were yellow and cheerful, in a way that seemed to be working hard against the surrounding circumstances. She had 2 kids, 7 and 4, both of them bundled in coats that were a size too small, and she came through the door looking like someone who expected to be told she had the wrong place. Dot pointed to the long table near the back. Sit anywhere, coffee is up. The kids can have juice in or milk. Luann Ostroff stood there for another second. Then she sat down. She held her coat closed with one hand, even inside the habit of someone who had been cold for long enough that warmth had become something not yet trusted. More came after that. By 6:30, there were 11 people at the tables in Dot's place, 7 of them from Sycamore Street, and the others regulars who had come in for their usual morning and found the place different than usual and had simply stayed. Nobody asked questions. There was a quality to the room that Dot recognized from years of watching people eat together, the particular kind of quiet that happens when a group of people are all feeling the same thing, but none of them are saying it, something that is not quite relief and not quite shame, but lives somewhere between them. Walt Briggs came in at 7. He was the hardware store owner. He had been on Main Street the afternoon before when Rosie went down on the pavement. He had looked up at the sky and walked to his truck and driven away. Dot had watched him do it from her window in the back of the diner where she had been doing inventory when the whole thing happened. He came in now carrying 3 space heaters still in their boxes. The good ones, the kind with the safety shutoff and the adjustable thermostat that cost $60 apiece. He set them inside the door and stood there and looked at Dot. For the houses, he said, whoever needs them. Dot looked at him, then she looked at the space heaters, then she looked back at him in a way that was not cruel but was not nothing either. A look that acknowledged what they both knew about yesterday afternoon without requiring either of them to say it out loud. Walt held her gaze. He did not look away. She nodded once. He nodded back. He left without eating. The space heater stayed. The pharmacist came in at 7:30. His name was Gerald Poole, and he had run the pharmacy on the corner of Main and 3rd for 26 years, and he was the kind of pharmacist who knew his regular customers by name and by condition, and who had more than once quietly extended credit to people who were short at the end of the month. He brought a cardboard box with over-the-counter medicines, children's vitamins, cough syrup, fever reducer, antacids bandages. The practical stuff, the things that a house with children needed and that cost enough that they were the first things cut when money got tight. He set the box on the counter near the door. For whoever he said. Dot put it on the table by the window where people coming in could see it. At 8 o'clock, a woman came in alone and sat at the counter and ordered coffee and did not speak for 10 minutes. Dot refilled her cup without being asked. Her name was Marlene Gibbs. She sat with both hands around the mug and looked at the surface of the coffee with the focused attention of someone who is trying to decide something and has been trying for several hours without resolution. She was a kindergarten teacher. She had 19 years of experience in a classroom she had decorated carefully in a way with children that her colleagues described as a gift, which was accurate. She was the kind of teacher who remembered her students' names years after they had moved on, who kept photographs from class pictures going back to her first year, who could tell you the name of a child she had met once at orientation in November. She knew Rosie's name. She had known it the afternoon before when she saw Rosie on the sidewalk. She had known it when she stopped and looked and took one step forward and then decided to keep walking. She sat at the counter now with her coffee going cold. Dot was at the other end of the counter when Rosie climbed down from the booth by the window and padded across the diner floor in her thin socks. She had Boone's jacket hanging off her shoulders like a cape. She climbed up onto the stool 2 down from Marlene and sat there and looked at the case of pastries under the glass counter. "Can I have one of those?" she asked. "The one with the sugar on top." Dot was already reaching for it. Marlene turned on her stool. She looked at Rosie. Rosie was examining the pastry that Dot had set in front of her, pressing her finger against the crystallized sugar on top to see how it felt. Marlene opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Rosie," she said. Rosie looked up. She looked at Marlene with the clear, direct gaze of a child who does not yet have the adult habit of looking slightly away from things that are difficult. "I know you," Marlene said. "I was at your school orientation in November. I am going to be your teacher. My name is Miss Gibbs." Rosie looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said. "You walked past me yesterday." She said it the way she said most things, not as an accusation, as a fact, the way you state something you observed and are simply reporting back. She said it, and then she looked at her pastry again and broke off a corner piece with 2 fingers. Marlene did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I did. I saw you and I kept walking. I should not have done that." She said it plainly, without the particular softening that adults use with children when they are explaining themselves. The qualifying language, "but I thought that you have to understand," just the fact stated directly, which was perhaps the only way Rosie would have received it. Rosie chewed her pastry. She looked at Marlene, at her hands around the mug, at her face, which was doing the complicated work of holding several things at once. "It is okay," Rosie said. "Somebody did." 3 words. Somebody did. Not forgiveness exactly. Not absolution. Rosie was 6 years old and she had not arrived at a philosophy about these things. She had just looked at the situation and reported the relevant fact. She had needed someone to stop, and someone had stopped, and the stopping had led to all of this, to the warm diner and the food and the lights going back on in the house on Sycamore Street, and her mother in a hospital being taken care of by people who knew how to do that. The stopping had happened. That was what mattered. Marlene looked at the child beside her. Her eyes were wet. Rosie picked up another piece of pastry and ate it. Marlene sat for a little while longer. Then she got up and left and came back 20 minutes later with a backpack. A good one, the kind that is made for elementary school, with the compartments for notebooks and the padded straps and the little front pocket for pencils. She had filled it, not with random things, but with the specific things a first grader needed. Crayons, a notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, a small ruler, a chapter book that was slightly above the expected reading level because Marlene Gibbs had been watching children learn to read for 19 years, and she could tell from a single exchange which ones were further along than anyone had thought to check. She set the backpack on the stool next to Rosie without making a ceremony of it. "For when school starts," she said. Rosie looked at it. Then she reached out and unzipped the front pocket and looked inside and zipped it back up. She put her hand on the top of it and kept it there. Okay, she said. Marlene Gibbs went home. Cole came in at 8:30. He had been out most of the night. He came through the door looking like a man who had not slept and who would not be mentioning it, who had simply continued operating past the point where sleep would normally occur because there were still things to do, and so he had done them. He sat down in the booth by the window, not the one where Rosie had slept, but the one across from it, and Dot brought him coffee without asking. He looked at Rosie. She had moved back to her booth with the backpack beside her and was looking out the window at Main Street coming to life in the thin winter light. "How are you doing?" he said. "Fine," she said, without looking away from the window. Then after a moment, "Is Cody going to be okay?" Cole wrapped both hands around his mug. "The doctor called Rook this morning," he said. "Rook called me. Cody is fine. They warmed him up overnight, and he is eating, and he is making the kind of noise that babies make when they are unhappy about something, which is a good sign." Rosie turned from the window. "What kind of noise?" Cole considered this. "Loud," he said. "The kind where everybody in the room knows about it." Rosie looked at him for a second. Then she almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that suggested the machinery for smiling was still in there and was considering whether this was the right moment. Cole drank his coffee. He was quiet for a while. He reached into his jacket and took out his wallet and opened it. He held the wallet open for a moment, looking at what was inside. A piece of paper, folded small and worn at the creases from 20 years of being folded and unfolded. He took it out. He held it between two fingers and looked at it. He had read it so many times that the words were gone from the paper in the sense that he no longer needed to read them. He knew them without reading them, the way you know a road you have driven 1,000 times, not because you are thinking about it, but because it is in you. He set the paper on the table. He looked at it for another moment. Then he folded it once more smaller, this time, smaller than it had ever been folded before, and he set it down and he did not pick it back up. He pushed it to the edge of the table. Dot saw it when she came to refill his coffee. She looked at the folded paper, and she looked at Cole, and she looked away again without asking. She poured the coffee. Cole stared at the table. He had carried that paper for 20 years as a way of not forgetting, as a way of making sure the weight of it stayed with him. He had believed without quite articulating it even to himself that putting it down meant letting go of something he did not deserve to let go of, that carrying it was part of what he owed. But sitting in this diner on this morning with Rosie in the booth across from him, in a street full of people who had finally done what they should have done, and a house 7 blocks away that had food in it and heat running and a door that latched, something had shifted. Not all the way, not clean, but enough. He was still sitting there when the door opened and Rook came in, and behind him the man they called Boone, and behind him 2 others, all of them carrying the look of men who had been up all night and were now coming in for the thing that comes after the night is over. They filled up the booths around Cole, and Dot brought coffee down the row without being asked, and for a while the diner was just warm and full and alive with the ordinary sounds of people drinking coffee in the morning. Rosie watched all of it from her booth. She watched the way a child watches when she is learning something, taking in the room and the people in it, and the particular quality of the morning, the way it was different from yesterday morning and the morning before that. She watched the neighbors from Sycamore Street eat breakfast. She watched Walt Briggs's space heaters sitting by the door waiting to go somewhere they were needed. She watched Dot move between the tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been doing this for 31 years and does not need to think about most of it. She was doing something that children do when they are coming out of a sustained period of danger. Not processing it, not in the adult sense. Just letting the present moment be what it was. Just sitting in a warm place with food in front of her and people around her and not having to think about what came next, because for the first time in 4 days, what came next was someone else's job. At 11 in the morning on the 5th day of January, Rook came back through the door of the diner with his phone in his hand. He sat down across from Cole. "Hospital called," he said. "Willa is asking for Rosie." Cole looked over at Rosie in her booth. She had heard. She was already looking at him. He nodded. "Okay," he said. He drove her in his truck, the pickup he kept for practical purposes because Rosie was 6 years old, and a Harley was not appropriate, and also because he was not sure she had ever been on a motorcycle, and today was not the day to find out. She sat in the passenger seat with Boone's jacket on her lap because she had given it back to Boone, with a seriousness that suggested she understood it had been a loan and not a gift. And Boone had taken it back with equal seriousness, and they had both understood what the exchange meant. Cole drove, and Rosie looked out the window at Harlan going by the streets. She had walked yesterday with her knees going wrong the corner where she had gone down the diner, getting smaller behind them. She did not say anything for most of the drive. Then she said without turning from the window, "I told Mama I would find somebody." Cole kept his eyes on the road. "When did you tell her that?" "The first day, when she got too sick to get up. She said she was sorry, and I said, 'Do not be sorry, I will find somebody.'" He drove. "You did," he said. She turned from the window and looked at him briefly, the way children look at adults when they are checking whether the adult means what they are saying. Then she turned back to the window. "Yeah," she said, "I did." They pulled into the hospital lot, and Cole found a space and got out, and Rosie got out on her side, and they walked in through the main entrance. This enormous man in a leather cut and this small girl in her purple jacket, and the woman at the reception desk directed them to the third floor without comment, which was either professionalism or the result of a call that Rook had made ahead of them. The elevator opened on the third floor, and a nurse was waiting, and she walked them down a hallway that had the particular quality of hospital hallways in the morning, the sounds of machinery and the smell of something antiseptic, in the particular kind of quiet that is not silence but the management of sound. She stopped at a door. She looked at Rosie. "Your mom has been asking for you since she woke up this morning," she said. "She is going to be okay. She needs rest, and she needs medication, and she needs to eat, but she is going to be okay. You can go in." Rosie stood at the door for a moment. She put her hand on the door and held it there. Then she pushed it open and went in. Cole stayed in the hallway. He stood outside the closed door, and he could hear faintly the sound of a woman's voice and a child's voice. And then a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing, but something that happens when the body does not know which one to do first, and so does both at once. He stood there. The nurse had gone back to her station. The hallway was empty. Cole stood outside the door with his hands at his sides, and he was not a sentimental man, not by any reasonable measure, but he was a man who had spent 20 years carrying something and had left it on a table in a diner that morning, and the lightness of not carrying it was a strange and new sensation that he was not entirely sure what to do with. He stayed until the voices inside settled into something quieter and steadier. Then he walked back to the elevator and went down and sat in his truck in the parking lot. Rook called at noon. "How is she?" "Fine," Cole said. "She is fine. Her mother is going to be okay. The baby is okay." Rook was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You know the town is doing something." Cole looked at the hospital entrance. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dot called Linda Brewer at the community center, and Linda called the county housing coordinator, and between the two of them, they have already got 3 months of back rent covered from an emergency fund that apparently exists but that nobody ever uses because nobody knows about it. Walt Briggs is doing the window repairs at the house himself, no charge. There is a woman from the Baptist church who does job placement, and she called Dot this morning and said she has 2 openings that would fit based on what Dot told her about Willa's work history. And somebody," Rook paused, "somebody anonymously paid the prescription balance at Poole's pharmacy. The medication Willa needed, paid in full." Cole looked at the dashboard. The medication she could not afford to refill. "That is the one." He was quiet for a moment. "The system," he said. "The one that kept saying no." "Yeah," Rook said. "It started saying yes sometime around 7 this morning." "Funny how that works." Cole did not say anything. He was thinking about the form from the county office, the one he had folded and left on the table at Dot's diner. He wondered if Dot had thrown it away or saved it, or whether it was still sitting there at the edge of the table where he had pushed it. He thought it did not matter. He thought the weight of it was the part he had been carrying, and the paper was just paper, and the weight had finally found somewhere to go. Willa came home on the 4th day. Cody came home on the same day discharged with a clean report and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. The hospital social worker, a woman named Brenda Holt, who had been doing this work for 15 years and who did it with the kind of thoroughness that is rare in underfunded departments, had connected Willa to every program available before she left the building. The emergency rent fund, the utility assistance, the job placement contact, a pediatric follow-up clinic for Cody that operated on a sliding scale. The system, for once, was moving at a speed that matched the need. Cole drove them home. Not because he had been asked to, because Rook had mentioned it to Boone, and Boone had mentioned it to Cole, and Cole had thought about Willa getting into a cab with Cody and arriving at a house she had left on a stretcher and walking in the front door alone, and he had decided without deliberating much that this was not how that should go. He pulled up in front of the house on Sycamore Street and killed the engine. The street was different in the daylight. Not transformed, not the kind of transformation that happens in movies where everything is repainted and flowers appear. Just improved. The kind of improvement that comes from small, specific corrections. The front door was straight in its frame for the first time in years. The porch step had been reinforced. The windows had their gaps covered, and the light inside the house was visible from the street, warm and steady, the light of a house that had electricity and heat, and intended to keep both. Willa stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. She was using a cane that the hospital had sent her home with a temporary measure while the infection finished clearing and her strength came back. She stood with the cane and looked at her house, and Cole watched her face go through several things. He did not name them. They went inside. The kitchen was full, not in an overwhelming way, not the result of charity on a scale that feels like pity. In a practical way, the things that a kitchen needs to be a kitchen were there. Cereal and bread and eggs and milk in the specific formula in specific diapers that Rosie had eventually specified to Rook via a serious and detailed conversation that Rook had reported to the group with a kind of awed amusement. Everything in its place. The refrigerator plugged back in and humming, the lights on. Willa stood in the kitchen doorway. Rosie was beside her. The little girl looked up at her mother and then at the kitchen and then back at her mother. "I told you," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not triumphant, just confirming something that had been established. Willa looked down at her. She reached out and put her hand on the top of Rosie's head, gentle and still. "You did," she said. "You did tell me." Cole stayed long enough to make sure things were in order, and then he went to leave, and Rosie followed him to the door. She stood in the doorway while he went down the porch steps, and he was almost to the truck when she spoke. "How did you know to stop?" she said. He turned around. She was standing at the top of the steps in her purple jacket, the broken zipper, the sleeves that were too long. Her face was serious in the way of a child who has decided that the question is important and is asking it as such. Cole stood at the bottom of the steps. He thought about Jamie, about the form in his wallet that was not in his wallet anymore, about the 20 years of carrying it and the morning he had put it down and the strange light feeling of walking around without it. He thought about Main Street yesterday afternoon, about the 4 people who had kept walking and the one who had not. "I heard you," he said. Rosie looked at him. "That is all it was. You said something and I heard it, and I did not decide to unhear it." Rosie thought about this for a moment with the visible concentration of a child who is taking something seriously. "Okay," she said. She stood there another second. Then she said, "Thank you for hearing me." She went back inside. Cole stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment in the cold January air of Sycamore Street. The street was quiet around him. The house was lit up behind the windows. Somewhere in there a baby was probably making the loud and specific kind of noise that indicated displeasure, which was the sound of a baby who was warm and fed and had opinions about the world, which was the best possible sound. He walked to his truck. He drove back to Main Street. The photograph that Dot took that night with a cheap phone camera in the low light of the diner appeared on the counter beside the register 3 days later. She had it printed at the pharmacy, which Gerald Poole did for her without charge, and she put it in a simple black frame that she had found in the back room, the kind of frame that comes in packs of 3 from the discount store and has no distinguishing features except that it holds things in place. The photograph showed Rosie asleep in the booth by the window. Boone's leather jacket pulled up to her chin, one small hand gripping the collar. Her face in profile turned slightly toward the glass, the neon sign from the window, casting a soft reddish light across her cheek. Her eyes closed. Her expression, the expression of someone who has stopped bracing for something. The expression of rest that is not just sleep, but the deeper thing, the rest that comes when the body finally believes it is safe. Dot hung it next to the register. Nobody asked her about it. People looked at it the way people look at things that hold more than they show, with a kind of quiet recognition. And they did not say much. but they kept looking. Marlene Gibbs came back to the diner on the evening of the sixth day. She sat at the counter and ordered pie, which she ate slowly, and after she had finished, she sat for a while with her coffee, and she said to Dot without preamble, "I have been teaching for 19 years. I knew that child's name. I had seen her twice." Dot dried a glass. Marlene was quiet. "I have been thinking about what that means," she said, "about how you can know someone's name and still keep walking, about how many times I must have done that and never noticed." Dot set the glass down. She looked at Marlene. "The thing about Rosie," Dot said, "is that she did not stop asking. She asked 5 times. 4 times nobody answered, and the 5th time somebody did. And everything you are seeing right now, the food in the kitchen and the lights on, and that baby going home healthy, all of it happened because she did not decide the 5th time was too many." Marlene looked at the photograph by the register. She looked at it for a long time. She came in the next morning with something she had spent the evening making, a small poster in a clear plastic sleeve, the kind of thing a teacher makes when she wants to put something on a wall and have it stay. It had Rosie's name on it and a drawing that Marlene had done herself, not professionally but carefully, of a small figure standing in front of a door that was open. Underneath it, she had written one line. She kept asking until someone heard. Dot put it on the wall near the door where people coming in would see it first. It was still there when school started 2 weeks later. Still there when Rosie Pruitt walked into Marlene Gibbs's classroom on the first day wearing a coat that fit and shoes that fit and carrying the backpack with the crayons and the notebook and the 2 sharpened pencils. She sat in the third desk in the second row, and she put the backpack on the hook that had her name on a small card above it, Rosie, in the careful block letters of a teacher who had been thinking about this particular child for several weeks. Marlene looked at her. Rosie looked at the classroom, at the bulletin boards and the books on the shelf and the other kids finding their desks. She looked at it all with the clear, attentive gaze of someone for whom school was not a given, for whom being here was the result of a sequence of decisions and efforts, and 5 attempts and one person who had finally stopped. Then she unzipped the front pocket of her backpack and took out a pencil and set it on the desk in front of her. Ready. That evening at 5:45, Cole Decker pulled up on his Harley in front of Dot's diner and came inside and sat in the same booth by the window, and Dot brought him coffee without asking. He drank it looking at the photograph beside the register and at the small poster near the door. She kept asking until someone heard. He looked at it for a while. Then he drank his coffee. Outside Main Street was doing what it always did in January, hunkering down, holding still, waiting for something warmer. The gray winter light was settling into dusk, and the storefronts were lit up against it, and somewhere a few blocks south on Sycamore Street, in a small white house with a front door that latched and a kitchen that had food in it, a woman was getting dinner ready, and a baby was making his opinions known, and a 6-year-old girl was sitting at a kitchen table doing the homework her teacher had sent home on the first day. The homework was simple. 3 lines to fill in. My name is, my favorite thing is, something I want you to know about me is. Rosie held her pencil over the paper for a moment, thinking. Then she wrote in the large, steady letters of a child who had practiced until they came out right. My name is Rosie. My favorite thing is when the lights stay on. Something I want you to know about me is I do not stop.